doing?
How you doing?
Welcome.
Thanks so much for doing this. So I'm here with the Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg. Thanks so much for coming on.
Good to be with you.
Sarah Huckabee Sanders did the Republican response to the State of the Union. It was a lot of fear-mongering about some dystopian future, wokeism, critical race theory, blah, blah, blah. What were your thoughts on the pretty stark contrast between what she did and what President Biden did?
I think the biggest difference was you heard President Biden talking about things that most Americans are focused on. What it'll take to keep up this extraordinarily low unemployment, how we created hundreds of thousands of manufacturing jobs, an agenda looking forward on things like, dealing with junk fees that cable companies or phone companies or airlines could charge people. And then you go over to the GOP response, and it's wokeism, and she's focused on whether you say Latino or whether you say Latinx. Right. And I'm just thinking, they're on two very different pages. But what was most striking to me last night in the chamber there was that you could feel, both on the things that everybody stood up and clapped for, and on the things where the congressional Republicans kept their seats, you could feel and see that every single thing he raised has the support of most Americans. And so to me, it's just a very clear contrast in terms of who's more aligned with where most of the country is right now.
And by the way, I think that's on purpose. I think the whole trying to shoehorn this idea that the Democrats are only focused on wokeism and Latinx and M&Ms and on is on purpose, because if they were actually to point out the reality of the situation, which is that Democrats are focused on job creation and getting the unemployment rate down low and cutting healthcare costs for Americans, that would be too popular. And so instead they have to create this alternate reality where the Democrats are just out there vying for taking your gas stove away.
Yeah, it's true. Look, they have this position, for example, they're against capping insulin at $35 a month. I'm not sure exactly why, but they're against it. I think they know enough about how out of step that is with the American people to not want to spend a lot of time defending that view. So they're talking about M&Ms or whatever the outrage du jour is going to be.
And there was a point during the speech where Biden had to turn and reassure the Republicans that Big Pharma would still make money. Don't worry, they'll be fine. In that chamber, Marjorie Taylor Greene made her presence known every opportunity she could by screaming or doing what she does. What was the feeling in the room? What was the sense in the room while she was doing what she was doing?
I mean, it's unfortunate when somebody decides to seek attention that way. And at the same time, in the room, you could feel that there's like 1,000 people in there. Most of them are there to respectfully hear the president, whether they agree with him or not. And then you got these fringe figures who I think can really embarrass their own caucus. And, it was a real problem for a speaker who I think wanted to demonstrate that there were adults in the room. But you try to remind yourselves that that's just a couple of voices, not most of the room.
Did it seem like there was any frustration, even among Republicans, with what she was doing?
I think so. I could hear a little bit of squirming
even from
around
that side.
me. And again, there's a range of opinion in that body. That's normal. That's healthy. That's how it's supposed to work. But there shouldn't be a range in terms of your level of respect for the presidency or for the process that you're part of.
Marjorie Taylor Greene presided over the House last week. She has this public affection with Kevin McCarthy. She's clearly vying for Trump's vice presidential spot, for his, effort to become the 2024 Republican nominee. What does it say that Marjorie Taylor Greene not only wants to be the face of that party, but that the party seems to want to let her be?
It's a worrisome thing to watch, because usually when you see that kind of, it's just some of what we've seen from this representative. It's not just the extreme policy positions, it's an extreme nature. I mean, the conspiracy theories, the space laser stuff, it's just something that I think any other leader would want to distance themselves from. But look, the speaker is working with the slimmest of majorities, and maybe he doesn't feel like he can afford to lose even the most disgraced or extreme member of his caucus. I get that, but that's a them problem. And at the end of the day, we think the best thing to do is to work with us on good policy. Again, every single thing the president mentioned in the State of the Union speech, most Americans strongly support. So if I were in the position of any of the Republican congressional leaders, I would be making a list of at least a few of those things that we could work together on, and hopefully we will on at least a few of the items on that unity agenda.
Right. There was this exchange between the president and Republicans surrounding Social Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, where their new line is that they don't want to cut these things. Of course, we know that's not true. We know that Rick Scott surfaced this plan where he would sunset all federal legislation after 5 years. If it's worth authorizing, they would of course do it again, which is effectively a death knell for those earned benefits. But Biden effectively got them to agree under duress that they won't touch those programs, but that wasn't in his prepared remarks. He basically put them on the spot and then got exactly what he wanted. What was the feeling in the room when it became apparent that Biden unilaterally disarmed the Republicans' most dangerous attack, in about 60 seconds?
It was a pretty amazing moment. These things are very, very scripted. And usually, even if there's a little bit of a disruption or something in the hall, that doesn't change anything in terms of the president's remarks. But this president was thinking on his feet, and I think saw an opportunity to really make clear that the congressional GOP can either own the position that some of its members have suggested that they would cut or sunset Social Security and Medicare, or they can reject it. And getting them on their feet, making clear, or at least saying they make clear, that cuts to Social Security and Medicare are off the table. If they follow through on that, that's a real achievement. And if they don't follow through on that, then the transparency that moment created will be very important as well.
Although I would say it's not like the shame of Republicans saying one thing and then turning around and doing another has ever stopped them before, but we'll see what happens on that front. On the infrastructure front, though, Biden announced during the State of the Union a new standard to require that all construction materials used in federal infrastructure projects are going to be made in America. How does that impact costs? And just as a follow-up to that, why are these infrastructure projects in the United States exorbitantly more expensive than infrastructure projects across the world?
Yeah, it's a big and a very important question. And part of what we're working to tackle is not just make sure there's more funding for infrastructure, but that it gets spent effectively. It's been the case in general with big projects, and in particular in the U.S., that the bigger the project, the more likely it is to take too long, cost too much, not come out the way you had in mind. And we've got to do everything we can to fight that. And we've got a lot of brilliant minds here at the DOT who've been working on identifying each point in the process where something can get delayed, get blocked, or see the costs escalate, and try to stay a step ahead of it. In terms of the Buy America piece, look, as you know, the president is passionate about making sure we create American jobs. And there have been a lot of loopholes, waivers, rules that have not been enforced very strongly when it comes to the basic idea we all agree on, that is the law, which is when you spend American taxpayer money on things like this, that you ought to be focused on American producers and making sure that it creates American jobs. So what he's directed all of the departments to do, what we've been doing at the DOT, is to tighten up and toughen up the rules on this. There have been these blanket waivers that just don't require somebody who's building a road or a bridge with federal money to work that hard to source American construction materials. This changes that. Yeah. There may occasionally be extremely specialized components or things that are more often produced abroad, but often that's precisely because we haven't pushed enough to produce them here at home. So the long-term result of this is not just that we get those products made in America, bought in America, put into American infrastructure, but it actually builds up more of the industry to begin with, so that we have that industrial base, we have that expertise, we have those jobs and those companies that can be selling both here and around the world.
So on that infrastructure point, can you give a snapshot of our progress there, maybe a few examples of some major infrastructure projects that are underway now?
Yeah, here's the way I would put it. The first year we were focused on just getting the bill through and selling this package, and the president signed it toward the end of our first year. The second year it was about standing up all the programs that the package created. This third year is when we're getting the money out the door and starting to see construction happen. I was just with the president in Baltimore. We were celebrating the tunnel that's going to be replaced there. It was put in 1873. It's 150 years old, and people count on it to get to where they're going. In New York, Hudson River Tunnel, 200,000 passengers a day go through there. If it became unavailable, if it were taken offline, you would feel the economic consequences everywhere. 1910. That thing was built, and we're finally replacing it. But a lot of smaller projects too. We're already identifying or moving on 2,700 bridges, 70,000 miles of highway across the U.S. A lot of projects that won't get national news, maybe won't get a presidential visit or a visit even from me, but they're going to make all the difference in the world to the community that's getting that funding, whether it's putting in new medians and crosswalks to make a street safer for pedestrians, or replacing an airport terminal that needs to be reworked.
On airport terminals, there was obviously the whole Southwest debacle recently. Republicans kind of trained their ire on you for not, I guess, moving to modernize Southwest's equipment. With that said, I don't know the extent to which the Department of Transportation is responsible for mandating that these airlines do have equipment that's able to service their customers. So can you talk about the work that you've done at DOT to rectify that issue, and also any changes with the FAA more broadly?
Yeah, one dynamic you often see is when a company screws up, there will be some people politically who try to blame it on the government. We don't run an airline, but we are a watchdog. And so I take very seriously the responsibility our department does have to hold airlines accountable to higher standards, especially on passenger service. As a matter of fact, a lot of the work that we did last year to raise the bar on customer requirements and enforceable standards, things like whether they cover your hotel or your meal or your ground transportation if you get stuck, because we raised the bar on that last year, that's helping us this year deal with the aftermath of the Southwest situation and hold them to a very high standard that wouldn't have been possible just a year ago before we took these steps. We're taking more steps now, and I'll give you one example that the president mentioned in his speech. It makes no sense that you would have to pay extra to sit with your kids when you're taking a flight. Yeah. And yet so often parents in the position of having to negotiate with the gate agent, or sometimes you're negotiating with your fellow passengers for something that should be so basic and so automatic. So we're going to make sure that this is a requirement. I'm calling on the airlines to do it anyway, so we don't have to, but we're going to be making sure that this is required.
Now, another element of what the DOT oversees is obviously our roads. Roadway deaths are, I believe, at a 16-year high. What is the cause of that, first of all? Because you would imagine that as cars get safer, as technology becomes more sophisticated, those kind of things would go down. But we're seeing roadway deaths go up now. And what's being done to mitigate that danger? We
have a crisis of roadway deaths that has been building for a long time in this country. In the proportions of the loss of life, it's comparable to gun violence, about 40,000 people a year.
And I would assume that some degree of responsibility is owed to the fact that we have cell phones now.
Absolutely. Look, technology cuts both ways. On one hand, you have technologies now that can nudge you back into your lane if you drift off, that can let you know how close you are to the car.
But the reason you're drifting out of your lane in the first place is because you're on your phone.
Well, that's just the thing. There is no car today, even with the most advanced technology, that doesn't require you to be paying attention, hands on the wheel, eyes on the road, all the time. And some claims are being made about this technology, but as great as those technologies are, you still need to be paying attention. There's no good reason to be looking at the screen of your phone or thumbing through your phone when the car is in motion. Put the phone down, let it wait. It'll still be there when you arrive safely and alive at your destination. So distracted driving is an issue, technology is an issue, but so is the design of the roadways themselves. And we've learned over the years a lot of things about how a road is designed that can either help or hurt when it comes to safety. That's why we put about $800 million on the street just recently to help dozens of communities do construction and hundreds of communities do planning to make their roads safer. If we have safer roads and safer drivers and safer vehicles and safer speeds, and we do more about the post-crash care so that fewer injuries turn fatal, we could dramatically reduce the number of deaths and move towards zero, which has to be our ultimate goal.
I want to switch gears back over to the circus element of this, and I do want to ask if you were surprised to see that Mitt Romney had called George Santos an embarrassment during the State of the Union.
If I belonged to the same caucus or the same party as he did, I guess I would probably have some choice words to it. It's something that reflects poorly on everybody. On the other hand, it's kind of where a lot of what you've seen on the fringes of Congress is leading to. I mean, in some ways, just a more extreme case of some of the, unfortunately, dishonesty and just fringe nature of some politics. Not all, certainly not even most, even on the other side of the aisle. But I certainly get how somebody like Senator Romney, who I disagree with on a lot of things, but also have found we can work with on a lot of things, he has a certain sense of just dignity, I think, about the institution. And if you care about that institution and you got a guy like Representative Santos there, I got to think that would be maddening. I mean, it's maddening enough as an American, and I guess he just couldn't take it anymore.
At the same time, I mean, it is the natural progression of a party that's fully embraced Donald Trump to then have recruited somebody like George Santos, who basically traffics exclusively in lying. So not the biggest surprise. But with that said, I know that we live in this perpetual cycle of hell and that lying is commonplace in government. But which George Santos lie actually shocked you? Like, which one left you saying, even in this atmosphere, like...
Again, I mean, on some level, I hate to say it, but this is more a matter of degree than it is a change in kind. It's just the ultimate kind of apotheosis of where things have been headed in a certain corner of that caucus for a long time. I guess the fact that it's not completely clear whether George Santos is, in fact, his real name just kind of sums it all up.
I guess that's like the ultimate, like, well, do we even know if that's his real name? But do we actually really even know if that's his real name?
Does this guy really exist?
Yeah. What I think is especially funny about that is that he. Here's the thing: when you need to have a new name, that doesn't exactly bode well for what happened in the past. So the fact that he had to change his name from, whether it was Anthony DeVolder and then turned into George Santos, the fact that you have to change your identity is usually a red flag unto itself. But for me, it's the dog thing. It's raising money for the homeless veteran's dog, and then that homeless veteran not getting those funds for the dog. But that's just me. In any case, we'll leave it there. I'll stop subjecting you to the insanity that is the George Santos saga. So, Secretary Pete, thank you so much for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Good to be with you.